August something or other, 1995. This is a Monday morning. We're here at the Lane Place, and we're interviewing Laurel Kentner, L-A-U-R-E-L, isn't it?
Right.
And K-E-N-T-N-E-R of Crawfordsville. And this is part of a series of interviews that we've been making of people of Montgomery County, both men and women, who served in World War II. The series is, we've had some, perhaps 35 interviews or so, and we found it very interesting, the type of people or the type of service people had and places they went. Laurel, why don't we, I should say that I'm Bob Wernle of the Oral History Committee of the Montgomery County Historical Society, and the cameraman here is Mike Hall, our Executive Director. Laurel, why don't we start out and tell us a little bit about your personal life, where you were born, and about your family, and when you were born.
All right. I was a native of Bismarck, Illinois. Bob. I was born and raised there, and my father and mother were ideal parents, great Christian people, and my father was a businessman. He had been and graduated in business college, and he was in the grain and the elevator business. I
think, Laura, you're going to have to tell them where Bismarck is.
Well, Bismarck, Illinois is north of Danville, Illinois, about 12 miles. And when I say Bismarck, most people think of North Dakota, you know. But at any rate, I have one brother who is older. I was born in 1923, and about the middle of the year. And so we were born over there in the great prairie country, and it was good grain and agriculture. And so my experience in my youth was under my father's business and as well as agriculture. And I knew all those people in that vicinity from the time I was a little kid on. And so I can remember so many things my father told me in business, and I've never forgotten them to this day. And just good theory, I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm. Where you, what was your parentage, or what nationality were you?
We were a strong German descent, and as a matter of fact, I have the Kentner people pretty well categorized now in research. And there are about 865 Kentners left on the earth, and they're from 4 countries, the United States and Canada, and there's one in England, and the remainder mostly are in Germany.
Mm-hmm. I suppose that explains how you happened to land in Bismarck.
I have presumed that's true.
Okay, well, tell us about your boyhood and where you grew up and what you do.
We had strong school systems there in the town, and both the grade school and the high school. I know even before I got out of grade school, they were encouraging me out to the high school to be with the juniors and seniors, and we would make several trips to Chicago while I was still in the 7th and 8th grade. And of course I liked that, to get to see the museums and go to the ballparks and such as that as a kid. But I did quite well in high school, and we had a German principal, Adolf Eichen. And frankly, he was a firm and a tough man, but he was a good man. And in class, you couldn't ask for better. He was always very patient, but he was a very, very strict man. And you better keep within the lines. And so, frankly, I asked junior year if I could graduate as a junior. And I had enough credits that I was able to do that. But of course we weren't involved in war right at that moment. And so he said, well, I think an extra year would do you well. He said, you're doing all right. And so I had wished he would let me out so I could get into the service.
Now the war had not started yet.
It had not, but
the draft was going perfect.
it was going, and we were, there were a few of us fellows very close, and on September 1st, 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland, we decided that we were in war, and we got ready for it ourselves, and tried to position ourselves in a situation where we could go where we wanted and where we were best able to be used.
Okay, did you volunteer then rather than be drafted?
No, I was called, although I went up and tried to get into the Navy Air Corps at the time, because I certainly wanted to fly, but I was in a necessary industry, and so they held me back for a while. But then in 1944, I was called, and they wanted me in the Army. I didn't protest it at all, and they seemed to understand, but I did request that they not send me to Europe, and I preferred that I go the other way.
So when did you enter the service?
I entered actually in early 1944.
Mm-hmm. Where were you sent?
Well, I did training in Texas under strong command, and was trained primarily by Ranger cadre. And we did have considerable casualties there at camp, and I was hurt, but I recovered all right, or apparently.
How were you hurt?
I was struck in the back of the head by a man jumping from a building and struck me in the back of the head with these boots. You remember that for about 1,000th of a second. And then out. But they always held it over our head there, that if you went to the hospital for 5 days, you had to start training over again. And nobody was much for that. And so you did everything you could to recover, and they would simply confine you to the barracks for a few days.
That was infantry, basically.
As infantry. And then I was sent to Fort Ord, California, and I was attached to the 27th Division, which was a New York division. And so we weren't long there at Fort Ord until we went up to Vancouver Barracks, Washington, on the Columbia, and from there we left for Overseas Point, and
You go by ship.
we did. And it was a rough trip over, not that the sea was bad, but we were plagued to death with submarines. And there would be some times when we would reverse our course totally. And of course, as Navy people well know, they did a zigzag fashion to avoid the submarine. But gradually, we accumulated more ships and a larger armada.
Were you on one of the Liberty ships?
I don't know. It was a pretty new ship, and there were 1,200 Navy men on there, and frankly, only 1,200 Army men. But it was a good, clean ship, and the food was good.
You were a private.
I was a private. And immediately upon landing on the first island, I was given stripes. I mean, just as soon as I hit the island, I don't know why, I don't know. But I guess that was that particular division.
Stripes, you mean one stripe of PFC or what?
No, I was given more than one stripe, as a matter of fact. And
what were you made?
Made a sergeant right off. And so, but we knew what we were doing. We were trained well in training.
I suppose that, Laurel, you've never been on a ship before, had you?
No, I hadn't. And you believe me, that was a new experience see submarines, but when you found out that they were about, you were scared to death. But we had 2 severe air attacks, and that really chilled me, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Dive bombers?
Yes, dive bombers and fighters came after us. And I was amazed at the way the Navy did their work in grouping ships together and almost coming to a stop to concentrate their firepower. And they really did. And but the Army men were put below deck, and I would rather have been on deck because I could hear what was going on, but I couldn't be in it. Frankly, I didn't know which corner to run to.
Getting back to it, if you're like most of us, Laurel, you haven't been very far before the Army took you.
Well, I had, matter of fact, Bob, I had traveled quite a bit.
That you were.
And I had known that I was going to have to go. So my brother and I and a friend took a trip almost around the United States. And I was able to do that. And so...
drive around?
Yes, we did. And so my father, of course, took us out quite a long ways when we were kids. And so I was used to being away from home.
Okay, we've got you out in the middle of the Pacific. Where do you go from here?
Well, I, of course, was being an infantryman. I was dreading what was coming. And we first went to the Ulithi Atoll, which is directly east of the Philippine Islands. And that was my first situation in there. And I was scared to death, but yet it was so beaten and drilled into you to know what to do. And I guess we called it at that time a controlled fear situation. And there were some desperate things that went on there. But
well, now was Ulithi occupied by Japanese?
yes, it was. And
Did you go ashore with landing craft? Or?
we did that, and the first time, and that was the first time that I went over to the side of the ship on the rope ladders where men were going down like ants. And I thought to myself, this just can't be happening to me, but it sure was. And
Were they shooting at you as you went down those ladders?
What?
Were they shooting at you as you went down?
No, not then. And and you had to be careful because your landing craft was bumping into the side of the ship and out with the waves, and some men were hurt caught between there. And so I made sure that I got on that landing craft without getting crushed to death. And there were 60 or 70 of us on that craft. It wasn't so bad until we got to the shore and they let the front of that ship down. We had to get out in the water, and then the fire began. And I guess we were scared to death. But something kept driving us forward, Bob. It was that training. You did what you had to do, and you were just hoping that you could get to the beach in the sand where you could get down. And I was always very, very protective of that weapon of mine. That I keep it out of the sand and mud, and because that was my whole family right there is that weapon.
Yeah. Did you had to wade in, did you?
We did. Probably
Holding your rifle over your head, I suppose?
up out of the water, and we didn't care about the packs or anything else that got wet. We weren't concerned about that. And frankly, we were just concerned about getting to the shoreline where we could get down.
Yeah. Okay, you hit the shore and then what?
Well, I'll tell you a little incident that happened to me. And I can't hardly comprehend it yet today. I was digging a pretty good trench with my helmet up that sand to the grass line. I got about 2/3 of the way up there, and fellow yelled, "Hey man, I need help. I'm a Navy man. I've got this rifle and I've never fired one before in my life."
Oh, my God.
And I don't know how that man got shoved off in that group, but he was well armed, had plenty of ammunition. Maybe they didn't like the guy, or maybe it was just an accident that he got on there. And I thought, dear God, how am I going to get up here and help this man that can't even fire a weapon? But I was, of course, trying to make myself as low as possible. I said, you keep your head down and keep the nose of that rifle out of that sand, and you crawl up here and keep down under my right arm. And I said, I'll show you how to fire that weapon real quickly. He didn't even have a clip in the chamber of that M1. And I showed him how to do that. And I said, now you stay right by my side. And he said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, the first thing you do is learn to keep your head down and everything down flat. And bullets were going over our head. And you didn't want to look back because you didn't want to see what was happening back there. You knew there were casualties. And, but at any rate, we got to the grass line, and I said, now you begin to observe where the fire is coming from enemy weapons. And there's a lot of palm trees, of course, out there, but those Japanese were dug in so much into the rock and entrances that you couldn't see, and yet they had automatic fire in there. When you saw automatic fire, where it was coming from, you tried to fire into it, but the snipers were so bad. But those fellows were generally strapped to a tree, to a palm tree. And I told him, I said, now you watch just above the surface of those palm trees, and if you see something move, or such as that, I'll show you how to fire this rifle. And I said, you pay close attention and pull that rifle close into your shoulder and your cheek and hold it tight because it can tear you up. And so we did see something happen in a tree, and I said, now, here's the way we go. I don't know why such a calm and peace came over me. It must have been the training and the good Lord with us, because we survived that. And that Navy man survived. I never did know his name. I never had time to ask him. But anyway, he survived that outfit and survived that war. And I've often wondered who that man is.
Yeah. Well, you were on Ulysses, and you really got rid of the Japanese?
Well, most of them. He never quite got rid of all of them, Bob. There were such caves in there, and frankly, pretty serious, maybe an ugly thing to say, but we just frankly had to burn most of them out. And I suppose 80% of the Japanese were burned out rather than shot, because they were so well entrenched in those dugouts and holes and in that rock. And of course, they'd been there for years.
Then the terrain was very rocky.
It was rocky and rough. And you just had to keep your head down and keep crawling and looking ahead. And whenever a company or a squad would advance, you had your flank men covering you with fire, and to try to keep the enemy fire down.
Oh, it's a horrible thing to say, but when you speak of burning them out, what did you do?
Well, they were flamethrowers. And we knew how to use those things, but they were dangerous to use, because if you hit something solid, like a wall or a rock or something like that, it would come right back on you. It was just kind of like unrolling a barbed wire. And if you hit something too solid, it'd come right back at you. And believe me, it would set you on fire, and you didn't get it out. And that's a wicked thing to say, but that's the only thing that at that time in history we could do.
What month was this, of what year this was going on?
Well, this was in 1944, and I can't quite tell you what the time out was. I just seemed to me like time escaped me, and I rather divorced that from my thinking.
It was about a year before the war ended, though, you said?
Yes, more than a year.
Mm-hmm.
And but we hit 3 other islands, and the last island being Okinawa.
Now when you got them cleaned out when you left it, what did you do, set up camp there? Or?
Yes, for the most part, and to try to take care of the wounded and such as that. And there were plenty of GIs left there, but I guess we were always looking over our shoulder for the fact that there were some Japanese stragglers, and I don't suppose we ever got the Japanese all out of those places. As a matter of fact, I read years later where the Japanese would come in and they just literally lived off the land,
Mm-hmm.
and their weapons were rusted and they couldn't do anything.
But now you've got on Ulithi, then I suppose you regrouped. Were there a lot of casualties in your outfit?
There were severe casualties, Bob, and so we regrouped and got new people in, and got back up to strength, and then went on.
Now, had you been promoted to sergeant by this time?
Oh yeah.
And so that you were probably in charge of a squad, or?
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I had the ability to, and I think most GIs had the ability to, well, through this chain of command. If you lost the commander, someone stepped up and took his place, right down to the last man, and he still knew what he was doing.
Mm-hmm. All right, how long then were you on Ulithi?
Not too long, just a matter of a week or week and a half. And ordinarily, well, they'd say, you fellas can take that island in 2 or 3 days. Well, that wasn't quite the case. A lot of times we get pinned down, and it just took a lot of men and a lot of firepower and an ingenious situation to get the situation covered. And of course, the naval aircraft were doing a lot of bombing and strafing right ahead of us. I would like to say something here in regard to friendly casualty. I personally feel like in any war it's always occurred, and it's an inevitable situation, because I've been in or near situations where the commander would call fire in upon his own unit. It was so mixed up, it was garbled, and I used to think before I went to the service that everything was absolutely in order. But boy, I tell you, confusion is the word. And there are times when I always felt comfortable when our own artillery was firing in close over us, even though some of the shrapnel was coming back through us and some men were hit. But I thought at least I'm going to be hit by my own friends and gunfire rather than the enemy that we were cleaning out and being cleaned out ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what you're going to leave Ulithi now? What happened?
Well, we hit 2 other islands, Bob, and but
do they put you back on a landing craft or what?
Well, no, we got back on ship.
On a ship.
Back on ship, yeah.
So you had that ordeal of going down a rope
right.
Once again.
Right. And our last ordeal, which I would prefer to get to, was in regard to time here, was Okinawa. And it was a walk-on situation. The Japanese had learned by that time that they were going to take an awful pounding from the air if they hit us at the beach. And so they backed off. And for 2 or 3 days, we didn't have much trouble. But then we really caught it because they were Well, that was their last main island, and that was nearest Japan, and the big island had a lot of Japanese civilians, and that was a bad island. We took the most severe casualties there of any island in the Pacific.
Well, you say you had a walk-on situation. You got down in your rope ladders, you got into your LST, and you went in shore.
Right.
And then you were able to walk in without being fired upon.
We didn't encounter any or much opposition at all.
And when did you start getting hit?
About 3 days later, when we began to push inland, and then we really caught it heavily because they were well organized, and they had at least 100,000 troops there, and we lost about 12,000 men killed, and we had about 75 to 80,000 total casualties. But the Japanese had something in the area of 100,000 men killed. So it was about a 10-to-1 ratio.
Of being killed.
Right.
Japanese to American.
Right.
Which outfit, what was your name, what was your number or your division or what was it?
Well, I was still, I was in the 105th Infantry, 2nd Battalion, and I was in a headquarters company, and headquarters meant nothing excepting that we got the supplies into our company and dispersed them through our battalion.
You spoke, Laurel, if you had 4 MOSs. What were those?
Well, I had.
You might tell.
I had.
What's an MOS?
It's a military occupation specialty. I had experience in agriculture, of course. I had experience in division and administration, business, and frankly, I was a pretty good shot, but I didn't want to be too good, where I would be placed as a sniper because that was a pretty precarious situation. I didn't want to be that good, but nonetheless, I had 4 MOS numbers.
What was you mentioned 2 of them, then I suppose infantryman is one of them.
Right, that would have been one.
What was the 4th?
And then the business administration was one of them. And I could take care of the administrative work of either the company or a battalion, or if it got down to it, necessarily a division.
Okay, were you ever hit or being close to being hit?
Yes, regretfully. And I think a lot of men, I don't know where it was, most men were hit in some way or not. Some quite seriously, of course, and some not so seriously, but I was struck. I took a bullet right through the side here, but it was clean and struck nothing vital. As a matter of fact, I was out on a mission with 9 other men leading them, and took the bullet. And frankly, at that time, the adrenaline was running so high that you just thought maybe, well, I was scratched or something. Maybe I hit a thorn or something, and you wouldn't realize it when the adrenaline was running that high. And I've seen a lot of men that would tighten their belts so tight that they couldn't feel pain. And that was kind of an ongoing thing. You did whatever was necessary.
Now, where did this happen?
On Okinawa. And then I was struck by a Jeep was in a situation came up where it shouldn't have been at all, with an officer and a driver. And it hit a large landmine. It would have taken the track off the tank, and that Jeep hit that thing, and I was in a position, I had turned to see the Jeep, and I thought, well, what is he doing here? He has no business here. But I turned around, and when that thing hit that landmine, of course, it just absolutely blood into small pieces, and I took the full force of that concussion in the back of my head here, which I've always had trouble with since. And the last 30 years I've been under a lot of duress with that, because they say the nerves died out in that area. Fortunately, thank God, it didn't get to my brain, and I'm mobile, so I really have nothing to complain about.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you hit that last time, were you hospitalized?
Really, I was too far from a hospital to be hospitalized, but they took you to small medical units and would put you in a tent. And I don't know how long I was there. I don't know how long I was out. I've talked to two medics in Pennsylvania who I happen to know, and they said they brought me in one evening, and that happened, I know, in the evening. And they said they brought me in, and all they could do was check their vital signs, and there was nothing they could do there for that situation. I still have a little hope.
Were you hospitalized when you took that bullet through?
No, I didn't get too excited about that. And one of the other fellows did. He said, "You're going to bleed to death." And I said, "I'm not too concerned about that as long as I feel like I can keep going." And frankly, it really never turned out to be much. I think they must have sewed it up, because I still have some stitch marks I can find around there. But I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. But I've seen some men get hit, Bob, and it was just like a huge blow, a huge fist that hit them. And it must have been in a vital part. But I've always been of the contention that some men were not vitally hit, but it was such a traumatic thing to them that it just, their nerves, their mind just
fell to pieces
and unraveled, and they fell to pieces. And I think some of those men died. And yet I've seen men so badly wounded that they should have been dead, but they didn't die. And so you never knew.
You never saw an inside of a hospital then?
Not until after the war. I had a bad case of malaria, and we took Atterbury to keep that malaria down, similar to quinine. We took one capsule every morning, and when we felt the island was secure, and they're close to the
We're on Okinawa.
Right, we're on Okinawa.
Okay.
And we knew that the war was about over, because those bombs were dropped on the 6th, I believe, at Hiroshima, and the 9th at Nagasaki. And it seemed it came back from the higher headquarters that things were pretty well over. And I know they would made us quit taking Atterbury, and I wondered why, because we should have kept taking it, because a lot of us had malaria very badly, and some of the fevers. And I had 31 different shots. And I think the worst shot I ever had in my life was for sleeping sickness. That broke out among the natives there, and they soon got that serum in there. It was supposed to be a series of 3 shots, and I was soon to be leaving the island, and they said, "We're going to give this to you in 1 shot." That was the worst thing I ever had. That was almost getting worse than being hit. It was like red hot lead, and a half a golf ball came up on your arm. A lot of guys passed out and fainted.
Oh.
And but it was called, of course, sleeping sickness, that is known as encephalitis, and so it was nothing to fool with.
Have we missed anything along the line we should have covered?
No, I think not.
Well, no. Some more exciting things are ahead, so tell us about that.
Well, the next great thing that happened in my life was when I was requested to join General Headquarters and General MacArthur. And frankly, in 24 hours, my life changed. I was used to being in the rough and tough of it, and here that night, a major met me when we got to General Headquarters, a great building there in Tokyo.
Well, why don't you lead up to that? How did you happen to be going off to see General?
Well, I received a telegram in the company I was in.
You were still a sergeant?
Yes. And received a telegram one night about 10 o'clock. And it simply stated, we request that David L. Kentner, that's what was my Army name, join Douglas MacArthur and General Headquarters immediately. It was not a necessary order, it was a request. I didn't have to go. But another friend there convinced me that I should go because I was a little disturbed about it. But at any rate, the next morning at 5:30, I was on a train, a Japanese train, and all Japanese people on there headed for Tokyo. Arrived in Tokyo.
Well, no, you didn't go on a train from Okinawa to...
Oh, no. This was from way up northern Japan.
Well, how'd you get up there?
Well, after we flew into Japan from Okinawa, the entire division, at the 27th, and we landed there at Atsugi Airfield. And immediately our company dispersed out and released prisoners, and we went to an artillery base where we destroyed that artillery and the breech locks real quickly. And then we were just a few days, we were sent to an air base in the far north of Japan.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier this release of prisoners was an interesting experience.
It was a traumatic experience, Bob. I looked at those fellows as we got them out.
Where were you, in Japan?
I was, yes, there at Atsugi, near Atsugi Airfield, and we went outside of there just a short ways and began to get prisoners out. And exactly where they came from, I can't tell you, except we did get some out of Sugamo prison. And one small incident there, in that group, there was a young Marine, still had his old Marine cap and insignia, which I was surprised at. And his clothes were grimy and dirty. And finally he just kept looking at me, and he walked over to me after a while. And he put his arm on my arm and he said, "Fellow, they caught me on Wake Island 42 months ago."
Oh, boy.
And he said, "They sure took care of us in poor style." So he said, "You guys take care of it." And he had a good deal of malice in his heart, I'll tell you that. Mm-hmm. But I would say, from history and the records, that one out of 3 of our prisoners to the Japanese died, whereas in Germany, only 1 out of 10 died. So the Japanese were severe.
If I suppose you found prisoners from other countries.
We did that. There were also intermixed in there British and Dutch and then some Americans. And I don't know if there were any in that group from that Bataan Death March or not, because we didn't talk a great deal. We just got them on planes as quickly as possible, our Americans, back to bases, primarily to a general hospital in Saipan, where they could be taken care of. They were in bad shape.
Yeah. You mentioned the prison. Did you go in there and release these people from the prison, or had they been already released?
Well, they literally, the Japanese had taken off, before they escaped.
And you went in
and we went in, and it was easy to
open
release
the
them,
doors.
open the gates, and it wasn't long till they were swarming out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, it was quite an experience to see those men who had been so long imprisoned, and I suppose Dutch were captured, maybe from the China, India, Burma Road situation.
Mm-hmm. So, you got this telegram and off you went to Tokyo.
I did that, and I got that telegram about 10 o'clock at night, and at 5:30 the next morning I was on the train headed for Tokyo. And so I had nothing. I wasn't concerned about food.
Were you all by yourself?
All by myself. And
you were still just a sergeant?
Still sergeant.
Okay.
And I would relate one incident. That when I stepped off the train in Tokyo Station, and they were enormous. They were a block or more square. And people would wait there for days. There'd be thousands of people in there. But right where I stepped off, there were, I would estimate, 300 Japanese Marines. They were old guys. They were sitting in formation, had their rifles across their legs, bandoliers of ammunition, and I knew that those men were just in from China. And they were tough people. They looked tough. And I thought, there's going to be no fight here, me against those, so I got out of there in a hurry.
Well, you reported into headquarters?
Well, I tell you, I started walking down inside that station. About 100 feet, I saw a GI, and he said, your name's got to be Kentner. I said, that's it. He said, let's get out of here. And so we jumped in his Jeep and rode for a long ways. And I don't know, I was kind of still in a haze. And we pulled up in front of an enormous building, 5 stories high. It's all concrete. Looked like a good building to me. And so that was the billet, or the headquarters of general headquarters, that is for the men. And a major met me as I stepped out of the Jeep, and he said, Sergeant, have you had any thing to eat today? And I said, no, sir. And so he said, well, one of the men will take care of your bags. And he said, you go in and freshen up. He said, I'll have a man take you in. And he said, I'll call up to the mess hall. And he said, how would the steak sound to you? And I hardly had forgotten what steaks were, you know. It was too long with C rations and K rations and nothing. I had lost an enormous amount of weight. I lost around 50 pounds. And, but I was more interested in surviving, I guess, than eating.
You're not very heavy even today, Laurel.
Well, I could lose a little right here, but that's from lack of exercise, I think. But I'm in generally good health, with the exception of this wound I had in the back of my head, and which I've suffered with continuously for the last 30 years. One of our famous doctors here in town, Dr. Marion Curley, has taken me through all this, and I don't think I'd be alive today had it not been for it.
Now, you had your stake, and when did you meet MacArthur, if you did?
Oh, it was a few days, and they began to acclimate me to get me in the proper room, and I know an officer stopped by there one morning, and he said, are they kind of treating you like they would a cattle situation? I said, oh no, I'm fine. And he said, don't, just be calm, do what you want to do. And he said, we'll get you situated and get ready to go. And so they trained us up in a fashion to general headquarters and heavy security, high security there. And so I suppose it was 10 days later before I saw the general. And then after being well trained for a few weeks.
Trained? What
well, trained in the security for taking care of, well, let's say undercover operations such as assassination attempts and such as that. And so then I was sent and took duty over at the Daiichi building, which was really general headquarters. eventually I came on to being there all the time. And but I only did, we were only allowed to do business or be on duty 4 hours at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had about 4 hours duty in every 48.
Mm-hmm.
And but we were well prepared to know what to do, and had good men, all good men.
Mm-hmm. And you were in the WWII building, and where were you living?
Well, I was still living in the finance building,
Oh.
which was 3 blocks away.
Mm-hmm.
But the WWII building was a beautiful building, right across from the Emperor's Palace grounds, right across the street from the moat. And so it was a fantastic building. It had not been bombed, and I think intentionally so.
I think we're all going to be interested now in your impressions of MacArthur.
Well, quite frankly, I think upon my first appearance to him and in the natural military courtesy, that he took strong note of each man that was there. And it seemed like he recognized you from that day forward. And so I met Mrs. MacArthur, and of course their son Arthur, I suppose, was 6 years old or so about that time. Mrs. MacArthur would always stop and have a conversation with us. Just a wonderful person. Mm-hmm. She's still alive today.
Oh, she is. I didn't realize.
Yes. And we still get some correspondence from her.
You do?
Yes.
What do you mean by that, correspondence?
Sometimes I'll call over there. She lives at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. And sometimes I'll call over there and just kind of check, see how she is. And she'll respond with a little gift once in a while.
Uh-huh.
And so I have always appreciated that.
Well, what happened with the MacArthur? What did you do for him? Or?
Well, it was simply a question of high security. We not only had his security, 5-star general, but also there were probably 22 or 3 other generals in there. And it was just our job to see that everything was secure about that enormous building, and it was a good building. And I think there's one man here in town who can vouch for that, maybe several, but Joe O'Rourke, Dr. Joe O'Rourke. I met General George Marshall there, and also Dwight Eisenhower later. Mm-hmm. And I know the morning that General Marshall came in, I was intentionally, I put myself on duty, and to see him in and up the elevator and down that long hallway on the 7th floor. And he simply seemed to be a very modest man. He had a heavy coat on. You could hardly see the 5 stars buried down deep in that coat. And he simply said, well, it's all over in China. Mm-hmm. And I knew what he meant. That's all he said. And he went into General MacArthur and talked to him and told him that we were giving up China.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you have anything to do with the surrender ceremonies?
No, not in the actual ceremony. But I was in there offshore, and quite frankly, there was a group of radical Japanese, these suicide pilots, who were determined that they were going to bomb the Missouri dive bomb. And it took the Emperor's son going in there and convincing those guys to get out of those planes to avoid that. And I've often wondered, with that plane right there in Tokyo Bay, which is a huge bay, and the warships about what might have happened or could have happened. But it seemed like then, after that period, the equilibrium of the country had calmed down, and frankly, I was amazed. I thought we would encounter resistance, but we did not. And frankly, I think that we were trained and taught that we should, every one of us, be an ambassador to that nation and represent something to it that it had never seen before.
How long were you in Tokyo?
I was in there from about November 1st, 45, or perhaps a little before that, perhaps October 15th, until probably mid-September 1946. And I suppose, Bob, the worst day of my life was around May the 1st, probably May the 1st, 1946. That to me was worse than combat. We had known 10 or 12 days prior to that time that Soviet agents were on the way, and there was to be an assassination attempt against the general, and there were 12 of us men picked to set that off, and we did that with security, high security. We were trained in that, how to do that. We did that very well. We avoided that one and took care of the situation, and one other one where they were out to get him. And but it always seemed to me like that the general felt like that he had a group of angels surrounding him, and he didn't need any protection. And even though we would guard him closer, maybe touch him or push him away into a protected area, or maybe even behind us, he would growl about it, but he never got mad. He made a statement one day. He said, "I think the Almighty sent me over here to do a job, and He'll probably let me finish it."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where were you when Hiroshima happened?
I was on the north end of Okinawa,
Oh.
and when the bombs were dropped, and of course there wasn't a lot of jubilation or celebration there at all about it. Very quiet. And I heard about the celebration in the States from that time the bombs were dropped, and apparently the Japanese were throwing in the hat.
Did they know, the people in Okinawa know what had happened?
I think so. Mm-hmm. I think so. But I'll tell you, the remaining Japanese military there, if they couldn't do away with themselves, why they jumped over the cliffs. And a lot, as unknown to me until rather recently, I thought a lot of the natives jumped over the cliffs. Mm-hmm. And but I suppose they were so well indoctrinated by the Japanese that they thought death was better than surrender. And there were very, very few Japanese soldiers taken alive. And the two commanding generals there committed heroic and did away with themselves.
Did you ever get close enough to MacArthur to have a conversation with him?
Oh yeah, yes. This was quite common. And he was a somber individual, but he was pleasant to talk to. He was very direct. Never had anything ill or severe to say to his men, but he was direct in his conversation, and seemed like he appreciated the men that really went all out for him.
Well, why don't we break it off right here, Mike and Mike, and Laura, we've had a little recess here and uncovered some more interesting things. This last thing that we just mentioned, these reunions. Tell us about your reunions.
Well, the first reunion I went to was in St. Louis, Missouri, and that was back in the early 80s, and it took a long time to get our reunion situation organized. And I don't know how many hundred men there would be now, because
This would be the reunion of what?
of the MacArthur, the people who were in higher security. But at that time that I was in there, in this entire company, there were probably 100 total men. And we had to have probably 15 to 16 men on each shift that we were in command of. And so we get together, and many of the fellows take their wives, and believe me, they live everywhere, all over. And every kind of profession you can think of, doctors, lawyers, ranchers, everything. And by and large, they've been a successful group of people. And I'm very close to a few of them, and it isn't anything for me to call Anchorage once a week or whenever I went to and over into Maryland and wherever the guys are situated, and we kind of keep track of each other. So it's just a good rapport.
And about the end of the war, when you were separated or when you were about to go home, you were speaking about General Mumford, or whatever his name was, asking you to stay on in service.
Yes, General's junior aide, Lieutenant Colonel, Colonel Bunker, and he was our straight-in line to General MacArthur.
You mentioned, Laurel, that you were asked to stay on in the service, and you were offered a commission.
I was, and
that was offered by Colonel Bunker.
Colonel Bunker. He was MacArthur's junior aide, and he was quite a dynamic man, and he was our in-line right directly to MacArthur whenever we had any problems or anything we wanted, and we'd always get about what we asked for. But when they found out about my time of coming home, he came over and asked me if I would consent to stay with the commission, but I didn't want to tie myself down to a length of period, and he really kind of leaned against me pretty heavy to stay, and he said, we'll get you, we have a position we want to put you in, and they would have gotten me up the line real quickly, and I guess five-star generals can do that.
Well, you were, home was calling, and as I understand, you had a fiancée back here in the United States waiting for you.
Well, that's true, Nova. There's many people throughout the community, and she was a cosmetologist, a beautician, and she had a grand clientele, and she's
Was there in Bismarck?
No, here in Crawfordsville.
Oh, in Crawfordsville.
And she's far more well-known, Bob, than I have, and she's a wonderful lady.
Well, now, had you moved over to Indiana at the time that you went into the service?
No. I was in Illinois and came back to Illinois.
Yeah, but how did you happen to know somebody here in Crawfordsville?
Well, my family, my father and mother, I'd always liked Indiana, and my father wanted to retire from the grain business, and so he did, and we came to Indiana and bought a good deal of land. And at one time, we were farming almost 1,000 acres in the early 1950s, and believe me, we were working, because we didn't have all this heavy, beautiful equipment they have nowadays.
Well, how did you happen to meet your wife then?
Well, I met her in the year before I went to the service, and I met her in church there in Danville through my brother and his wife. And so apparently immediately we cracked it off pretty good, and 3 months after we met, we were engaged, and she's just been a wonderful, wonderful lady, and I have one son, Stephen. And I was hoping that he would do a tour of military duty, but he I guess that he's here to the ground and was kind of seeing what I went through, and he didn't didn't want any part of that, so I sent him off to Culver Military Academy for a while. And so it kind of cut his teeth on it, you know.
Now, you've been in the farming business here. You've also been in real estate.
I've been in real estate almost 40 years, Bob. I've enjoyed it. For the past 10 years, my health has been such that I really haven't felt up to par, so I haven't done too much. But I've appreciated the wonderful old clientele I've had that would call me even today and ask opinions or perhaps ask me to go do a job, and I will do it. But I got into appraising for banks and corporations, even out of state, and I like to do that. I knew very well how to do it. But I would say to you that after the war, and I kind of got myself straightened out a little, I went back to the University of Illinois and finished up over there. And then a few years later, I did further schooling at a school in the East and got the business degree I needed just for my own business welfare.
Mm-hmm. I think Mike touched on that business of threats to MacArthur's life.
Oh, yes. There were 2 assassination attempts, and as a matter of fact, I have records of those in black and white. And we knew that was coming through our agents in the Soviet Union. And so we prepared for that. We set it off all right. We got it stopped. And so it was a little more drastic than I'm going to tell you about right here, but we did set it aside so that the general was safe and no one of our generals was hurt or injured in any way. So we got that situation settled all right, but the more I've thought about that since, the more nervous I've got about it, because if any one little thing had gone wrong, why, it could have been a terrible situation.
Well, Laurel, what has been the, as you look back on your career in the service, what do you remember the most, or what bears down on your mind more than anything else?
Well, to rather categorize those things, Bob, I think the severity of the training I took, and yet I always had a mental attitude, if there's one man still on his feet, I'm going to be there with him. And in spite of all the rough circumstances. And then I think in going overseas, the first island we hit, I don't know, there was something going on inside of you can't describe in words. There was no saying, is that bullet meant for me, or does it have my name on it? And you wondered, am I going to bite the dust here, or am I going to make it? And
you have flashbacks?
Yes, I do. I regret that I do have flashbacks. Not often anymore, but I do have flashbacks. And I tell you, I think all of that is just indelibly marked in a person's subconscious mind, and just no escaping it. And I know when a few of us get together as military people, we understand each other. We talk about things, and one of the generals I speak with, he said, well, he said, I guess we can break down and tell each other a few lies and truths that nobody's ever heard. And every man had his own different situation, you know. And so I don't think we really expand upon things, but we tell things, and they really seem enormous now, but it was just a thing that we were trained to do and had to do. And so I had a pretty bad time after I got home with flashbacks and nightmares.
Are your buddies still, any of your buddies still around?
None around here close. They're
Still living though?
Oh yes, there's several, but at my age, there are quite a few of them dying off. And the closest one I have is at Annville, Indiana, Robert Marco. And there are probably some about the vicinity that I don't know, but my closest friends are ones at Hagerstown, Maryland, one's in Glasgow, Kentucky. Earl was a successful businessman, and then one who remained in the military for 30 years in Anchorage. And we all talk quite frequently. We're like brothers.
Mike, I think maybe we'll break it off here. Did you have any things that I missed?
Sounds very complete.
All right. We certainly thank you, Laurel, and we're going to take this tape and we hope to make a copy of it for you, and then we'll put 2 copies over in the local history room of the library.
Well,
believe it or not, people take those things out and look at them.
do they?
Oh, yes, they do.
Well,
And I hope 100 years from now, they'll still be there and still be usable, but we hope they last that long.
I want to tell you one little thing here, Bob, Mike. My discharge and separation papers, I had quite a long terminal leave time when I got home because I hadn't had any leave. And but anyway, they're almost wiped clean. They don't have those MOS numbers, and they only have the time of the last island that I was on. And I think that's due to the fact that I was in the security that I was, that they didn't want that exposed to the public.
Do you have a couple of Purple Hearts for those that...
No, I don't. That's a funny thing. I received a letter from the national commander of the Veterans Administration about 2 years ago under George Bush, and he said, "No, we know you were hurt." He says, "Your friends verified that in your records," but he said, "We will not allow you a disability." And so, that's one of the parts that seemed a little bit unfair, but nonetheless, I'm glad I could do what I did for my country, and if I could, I'd do it again.
Well, thanks very much, Laurel, and this will be a part of history.
Well, that's great. I didn't expect to be the history